Hi, it's Gary Norton again. I want to create the third in this short series here, following up to the one I just finished on tokenization and the context windows. And this will be the last one I do today, and it's about retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which is kind of a big deal in terms of content quality that an LLM can give you. I want to explain this and relate it back to the context window and tokenization and why it matters. Uh, this article is written by Quadrant, and Quadrant is a local version of a vector database that you can use to store your personal documents in. Now, don't worry if you don't understand vector databases or things like that. Originally, I planned to do some videos where I was going to teach you all about it and explain vectorization and how the numbers all work together. Let me just dumb it down. A vector database takes objects and it represents them in a numerical format, typically in an array. And an array is just a fancy word of saying a list of objects. But think of these as a bunch of numbers, and it goes down to parameters. The most common ones you use in the small token, there'll be like 1500, like 1536 parameters, I think. So for every piece of text that goes in, it will take a numerical temperature of 1536 different variables and give you a score based on that. Again, it doesn't matter. You just need to know that part of your data is taken and created into a form that the LLM can use to identify documents that you've uploaded to help it give you a better answer. And I want to explain why that matters. So when you ask an LLM a question, in this case, it was asking if it met its budget goals or spending goals, you'll notice that not only is it asking the LLM right down here in this blue box, but it also has a little tangent going into a knowledge base. This is where you can add your information to help an LLM be more specific to you, because an average LLM like ChatGPT obviously has no record of what your spending was last month. Being able to personalize an LLM to use that type of information is really powerful. In this case, it's talking about spending habits or expense reports, but it really could be tied into anything you want, like custom bid proposals or knowledge bases, or even your diary. Or if you're writing a book, it could have all your character notes and scene details. But this is the basis of it, is that you use your additional information to augment the generation that an LLM gives you. And the R for retrieval references a process that takes place before you even ask your question, and it starts with indexing. So the knowledge base points to a loader here, and really what that means is you take your documents, say it's a PDF that contains all of your meeting notes from the last quarter for your company. And each of those meeting notes has the details, the people that attended, the action items, etc. Those items get fed into a splitter because the RAG system doesn't process them as a whole. It only wants to process them as a chunk. And these chunks are really important because if you go back to the context video that I just created, where you've got the entire whiteboard, and remember I used the example of every time you ask the question and it spits out the entire generation, and then you ask it a question again and that entire document gets refed in, and it keeps stacking and stacking, and your context window gets really big, and pretty soon you're dealing with a slow prompt, and the effectiveness goes down. The cool thing about RAG is, rather than feeding in that whole PDF from the agenda, it takes a portion of that PDF and it extracts that to the LLM. So the LLM doesn't need to have the entire document in memory. It only has the information that's important. Think of this as like when you were taking a test or something, and you went back through your chapter book or your study book, and your chapter might be 30 or 40 pages long. But typically, when you needed the answer to a question, you would go through, you would generally find some subsection. Maybe it was highlighted with a highlighter. Maybe it had things like the bold words that you knew were important. And that's really what you cared about. You didn't care about the chapter in its entirety. You just really needed that specific detail. That's what RAG is to an LLM. So not only does it give you more specific information, but it gives it to you in a way that keeps your context window smaller. And remember when I said a smaller context window is going to get you better answers and get you more accurate data in a faster time frame. So this process here is quite simple. It's almost always behind the scenes. You'll never see it. You'll basically say upload this document, and it will split it into chunks. And those chunks are called embeddings. Now, there are a couple different ways those chunks can work. You can split it into size and say, I want each chunk to be 1,000 characters long. Or maybe you chunk it by semantic meaning, like maybe chunk paragraphs or subsections. That's helpful. But in terms of optimization, most of these are done by like character boundaries. Say I'm going to load 1,000 characters. Now, sometimes that 1,000 characters might be in the middle of a paragraph, and you wonder, well, like, what does that do to context? Because context is really important. If you think of context in the textbook chapter I referenced, usually those are related ideas and concepts. Well, embeddings have a concept called overlap. And overlap is a way, say I start chunking a document and I tell it 1,000 characters. Now, the first 1,000 characters go into embedding number one. And then embedding number two comes in, and it would normally pick up at the first character, which now would be 1001. An overlap would give me the ability to go back and say, maybe take the last 200 characters from the chunk before me so that I can maintain some context for what happened. That way, I'm just not dropped right in the middle of data and it doesn't make sense. The most common overlap that you're going to find in retrieval augmented generation is about 20%. So if you are throwing things in, say, 1,000 chunk embedding, you would want to allocate about 200 characters of that to actually represent, your overlap. This does mean that you have a few more embeddings than you would have naturally, but it will give you a more pristine context to answer the questions. So that document that you uploaded for your meeting notes gets broken down into a number of these embedding models. And it will vary by document, but generally, like if you uploaded a 5,000 word document with, say, a 20% overlap, you're probably looking at maybe 7 to 8 tokens in that if you're splitting them up at the 1,000 token mark. Those documents or tokens then come back into the question that you ask an LLM. So if you had a question like, how do I do X? Or what were the meeting notes from, or the action items from last Tuesday's meeting? What would first happen is it would make a query to the embedding database and say, do I know anything about those action items from last Tuesday's meeting? And it will sort through those documents and return only the portions of the document that it thinks that you're interested in. And that's this yellow box here. Now, what it does with that, I'm going to skip over the tokenizer part, but it will, in essence, use that augmented data or those relevant snippets. So if you're chatting with ChatGPT or Claude, before your answer goes to Claude, instead of uploading that full PDF document, the RAG agent is uploading that small snippet and then submitting your answer to the LLM you're using. In this case, it's ChatGPT or OpenAI, maybe it's Google, Claude, anything that you want. But the premise is the same, is that before we ask the LLM, the engine, we're going to give it the chunks of relevant data that you want and then let it process. Now, again, when that answer comes back, because it used only chunks of that document, you've preserved your context window even more. You've kept it shorter, which one makes it easier for the LLM to process and kind of remember what's going on. Think of it like a grocery list. If you're trying to remember 3 or 4 things and you go to the grocery store, it's probably not a big deal. But if you got to remember 20 things, sometimes you might forget. Even if you write it down, it's hard to remember. That's the concept with the context window. Basically, if you can keep it shorter, you'll be better off because of it. The goal, remember, as small as possible, but as big as necessary. And part of the way we keep that down is by this retrieval augmented generation. In addition to keeping it small, it's really giving it the data that you care about, which is the first step in helping AI really be tailored to you. It's what makes your answers different than the next person, aside from things like query prompting, which we'll get into. But that really is it. That's what I wanted to talk about today, is help you understand what tokens are. They're the sub-elements of words, and they are stored on the context window, which is the whiteboard. And when the whiteboard fills up or the blackboard fills up, then we start losing information, or the more information on the blackboard, it just gets confusing. In addition, when we want to add your information to it to help, whether it's personal notes or local systems, we really want to use that RAG system to do that. It's much more effective. It's faster than other things. For example, you could retrain LLM models, which I'll talk about that later, but that's more difficult and more time consuming. And the reality is this is the most accessible solution available to you as just an average user. And in 99% of the cases, it's going to be exactly what you want, is to set up your own retrieval augmentation system that allows these type of answers to be more tailored to you. Thanks. I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope this information helped. If you have any questions, let me know. I really do wish you would sign up and subscribe to the channel. As you recognize just by looking at the subscriber stuff, we're a small channel. I'm looking to grow. I'm hoping the information I share is of value. If there are any questions you have, please come over to the community and ask them. I'm happy to help. Thanks again for your time. Bye.